Perhaps the most contentious issue when we're dealing with quail is predator management. Should we be killing coyotes? Should we kill the gray foxes? Whatever. It's a complex topic, and 2 + 2 don't always equal 4. As an example, the quail that we love, the covey rise, is a function of predation over thousands of years. If those quail weren't trained by those predators, they wouldn't behave in the way that we like to see them behave. So you got to appreciate predation as a factor. And if you're a quail, you are at the bottom of the food chain. There's death from above, there's death in the tall grass. Everything out there is ready to eat you, your chicks, or get into your nest. And there are times when you say, how do we ever have enough quail that we can have quail season? So the quail have really got a tough road to hoe if they're going to get ahead of their predators. But let's talk about predation and predation management. Now, I don't equate predation management with predator control necessarily. Predator control means we're doing away with this particular problem offending critter. Predation management means that we're going to be looking at it both in terms of some lethal control as need be, but we're always going to precede that with some non-lethal control in terms of habitat management. So we'll start with the non-lethal control in terms of good habitat and go from there. I get most concerned about predators that take out a whole covey at a time. In other words, nest predators, egg predators. That quail sitting there on a clutch of 12 to 14 eggs, a skunk comes by, a raccoon comes by, wipes out the whole nest kind of thing. So I get more concerned about those than I do about the hawk that takes them off picks off a quail one at a time. And from a predation management side, that doesn't necessarily mean we're out there to kill every raccoon or every skunk. Again, we want to first say, is our habitat working indirectly as a defense against predation? And when we're talking about nesting habitat, that's why we harp on things like having suitable nesting cover, 300 bunchgrass clumps per acre across the landscape. Now, to think about that, think about when you're at the carnival and you've got the shell game, and the carny has 3 shells and there's a pea under one of them. That means you're going to win 1 out of 3 times, he's going to win 2 out of 3 times. The odds are in his favor. Now let's expand that to the idea if we've got 300 clumps of grass out there on an acre, how many times can we fool our nest predator, whether it be a coyote or a raccoon or whatever? We're shifting the odds to our favor in terms of the quail. We're tipping the odds towards the quail. That philosophy is called thimble rigging. Just more potential clumps on the ground out there, more potential places to hide their eggs. It works towards the favor of the quail and away from the predator. So keep in mind, good nesting habitat ought to have at least 300 suitable clumps per acre. It's okay too if it has 50 to 100 clumps of prickly pear, because that prickly pear serves as a mechanical deterrent to many forms of predation. So your first line of defense should always be good habitat management, and good nesting habitat should be one of your primary concerns. Talk a little bit about a philosophy of pest management that our agronomic experts have been using for the last 40 years. It's called integrated pest management. There's a lot of parallels that we can take from the production of alfalfa or cotton and apply it to the production of quail. The first thing is the recognition that there are pests and there are beneficials. You don't go out there with the intent of killing every insect, because you got some like lady beetles that are helping you. You got to realize that in the predation world, again, it's a complex system. Here at the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch, we don't control coyotes. We think coyotes are a left-handed ally of the bobwhites. And we think mainly that occurs because they focus, they eat, they control, if you will, some of the smaller predators. We had a study out here from 2010 to 2012, looked at 1,028 coyote scats. Only one of those contained quail feathers. They ate more skunks, they ate more snakes, they ate more raccoons, even badger, than they ate quail. So they're actually working in your favor by keeping some of those smaller mesocarnivores down. And so the coyote in that situation, we believe, is more of an asset than it is a liability in terms of quail. If you've ever been in a cotton situation, you know that you go out there to check these little pheromone traps to see if you've got boll weevils or whatever the case might be as an index to what is the population trend of your pest doing. And if it increases to a certain level, that they call the action threshold or economic threshold. That means it's reached a certain point to where the cost of control would pay for itself. If we try to apply that in a predation context for quail, we want to have an idea of who our enemies are out there and what are their trends. I'm going to begin to name off some of the potential enemies of quail: skunks, bobcats, coyotes, raccoons, hawks, foxes, feral cats, wild pigs, and we could keep going. Quail has lots and lots of enemies. So how can you estimate or get an idea of whether or not some of those are beginning to be at a level that would be problematic for quail? You can do that. One way is with game cameras. And we strongly recommend that you use game cameras positioned at places like quail feeders, at waters, these kind of things. So we have a way of monitoring what the population or the relative abundance of our coyotes versus our bobcats versus our raccoons is over time. Those game cameras are not expensive. They provide a lot of information to you. I strongly recommend you use them as a component of your integrated pest management strategy. The third component of the integrated pest management is once you decide that control is necessary, you don't necessarily start out with your lethal control first. You use non-lethal, which again is going to be less expensive. In our case, that means habitat management. That means those 300 bunch grass clumps per acre. That means a good quail house, a good shrub about every softball throw apart. Trying to make that habitat work to the advantage of the quail and away from the quail's predator. But if we decide that, for example, raccoons are problematic, then you move in with direct or lethal control. And the best way, there's two ways that I recommend doing this. One is with cage traps, have-a-heart traps, live traps. And when you know that you've got 5 raccoons visiting this quail feeder, you move in there with 5 or 6 or 7 traps. You try to take them out in one fell swoop. You don't want to sit there and take out a raccoon every night for a week, because mama raccoons are going to get smart to that. So you want to try to take them out where they're still naive to what trapping is. Take those animals out of the population. Don't take them and release them somewhere else. Euthanize those animals. Check with your game warden if you have any concerns about that. But as long as you don't possess the fur, you can do that. Skunks the same way. What I would recommend is that you use cat food, canned cat food, or sardines for bait during the winter months. And then during the summer months, you use whole eggs, chicken eggs. Because if you use cat food during the summer months, it's going to be attacked by ants. It's going to be unusable. So during the winter months, use canned cat food or sardines. In the summer months, switch to chicken eggs for raccoons and skunks. And that's largely what you'll catch. And that's generally what you're after, is those 2 species right there. Sometimes if you've got foxes, the gray foxes, where you have many gray foxes, they can be problematic. You can catch them in a live trap, but you need a 4-foot live trap, not a 3-foot live trap. But you can catch them with eggs or with cat food. You're never going to catch a coyote in a cage trap. They're too smart for that. You can catch bobcats if you think bobcats are problematic. You can ideally use these live traps that have a compartment on one end where you put a rooster in them, and they're quite effective for catching bobcats. So you can target your control alternative depending on what kind of predator species you think is problematic. Always remember, when it comes to predation management, that your habitat is your first line of defense. Not only in terms of the nest clumps we talked about or the good shrub cover, but plant diversity. If we have shrubs that are producing, for example, we have elbow bush that produces fruits in June, the coyote scats turn blue from eating this. They focus largely on that. Prickly pear tunas, same way mesquite beans, grasshoppers. Those are all what we call buffer species. And so the greater diversity of plants, the more buffer species we have that can help take some of the weight off of our critters like quail. And now the coyotes are becoming more vegetarian, and that's what we like. If the decision is made to do some trapping, some lethal control, do so in a surgical strike fashion. Don't go out there with one trap and set it for the weekend and think you've done any good. You haven't. You're just blowing in the wind. Go in there with multiple number of traps, and again, either use live traps or you can use these what they call dog-proof traps, which are designed specifically for raccoons. And go in there and set multiple traps around a feeder or water with the goal of taking out this family unit as opposed to just taking out one or two individuals and then making the rest of them trap-wise. Now when I say lethal control, a lot of people say, well, yeah, I've got a live trap down here, I'll go out and set it. If you do any kind of trapping that's very much of a piecemeal approach, I'm going to do it this weekend, once every 6 weeks, whatever, you're not going to be effective. You need to be concerted in your trapping effort. You need to be a surgical strike. So again, move in there, trap intensively for a short period of time, try to take care of the problem, and then move out.